The emergency lights flashed across Space Station Gamma 7's pristine white corridors. Red warning signals reflected off the metal walls as Dr. James Walker ran towards the containment area, his boots making heavy sounds against the floor. The station's AI kept repeating the same message over the speakers. All non-essential personnel, please return to your quarters. This is not a drill. James had seen many strange things during his 5 years as the station's lead xenobiologist, but nothing had ever caused this level of panic before. 3 different alien species had sent emergency warnings to the station in the last hour alone. Their messages all said the same thing: destroy the creature immediately. Dr. Walker called out Tom, his young assistant, running up behind him with a tablet. They managed to contain it in Lab 4. But sir, you should know, it killed 2 security robots before they could get it in the cell. James nodded, taking the tablet and reading the initial scans. The creature had been found in a damaged escape pod that drifted near the station. The pod's design was unlike anything in their database. As they reached the lab's observation room, James saw a group of people pressed against the reinforced window. Through the thick glass, he could see why. Inside the containment cell was the darkest creature he had ever laid eyes on. Its body seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The being stood about 7 feet tall, with a sleek, powerful frame that reminded James of Earth's big cats. But unlike any Earth creature, its skin appeared to shift and ripple like living shadows. "That's a shadow stalker," said Captain Reed, the station's security chief. His face was pale. "We thought they were just stories told by deep space traders. No one's ever captured one alive before." "Most lethal predator in known space," added another officer. "The Centaurians lost 3 colony ships to just one of these things last year, or so they claim." James stepped closer to the window, studying the creature. Something wasn't adding up. The shadow stalker wasn't acting like a mindless killing machine. It sat calmly in the center of the cell, its head tracking the movements of everyone in the observation room. Its eyes glowed with a deep purple light that seemed to hold intelligence. "Has anyone tried communicating with it?" James asked. The security team looked at him like he had gone mad. "Communicate? Doctor, the only thing that thing communicates is death," Captain Reed said. "We've already received orders from Central Command. Once the containment field is at full power, we're supposed to flood the chamber with plasma." James watched as the creature tilted its head, almost as if it understood their conversation. "Look at its posture," he said. "It's not displaying any aggressive behavior. No pacing, no testing the barriers, no threat displays. That's not normal predator behavior when cornered." "With all due respect, Doctor," Reed replied, "we have warnings from 3 different advanced species. The Arcturians even threaten to cut off trade relations if we don't destroy it immediately." But James couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. He had studied dangerous creatures all his life, and this one wasn't acting like any predator he knew. As he watched, the shadow stalker raised one of its limbs and pressed it against the glass, spreading out what looked like fingers. "Give me 1 hour with it," James said suddenly. The room went silent. Captain Reed stared at him in disbelief. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. We have it contained. I'll stay in the observation room. If I'm wrong, we haven't lost anything. But if I'm right..." James let the sentence hang in the air. "Captain, we might be about to make first contact with a new intelligent species." Reed looked at the creature, then back at James. 30 minutes, he said finally. Not a second more. And at the first sign of trouble, we're activating the plasma." As the security team filed out, James pulled up a chair and sat down close to the window. The shadow stalker's glowing eyes fixed on him with an intensity that would have made most people run. But James saw something else in those eyes: curiosity. "Hello," he said softly, placing his hand against the glass where the creature's limb was still pressed. "I think you and I have a lot to talk about." Behind him, Tom nervously checked his watch. 30 minutes to prove that the galaxy's most feared predator was more than it seemed. James had a feeling these would be the most important 30 minutes of his life. 2 weeks had passed since the Shadow Stalker's arrival on Space Station Gamma 7. Dr. James Walker sat in his office, reviewing video footage from the containment cell for the 20th time that day. Dark circles under his eyes showed his lack of sleep, but he couldn't stop watching. "You're going to get fired," Tom said, placing a cup of coffee on James's desk. "Or worse. The captain is already angry about the delayed execution order." James pointed at his screen. "Look at this. Watch how it arranges the objects we gave it." The footage showed the Shadow Stalker carefully placing different size blocks in a pattern that repeated and grew more complex with each sequence. "That's not random behavior, Tom. That's mathematical thinking." A loud knock interrupted them. Captain Reed walked in, his face red with anger. "Dr. Walker, explain why my security team just found unauthorized testing equipment in the containment area." James straightened in his chair. "I'm conducting intelligence assessments. The Shadow Stalker, I'm calling it Knight, shows clear signs of advanced problem-solving abilities." "Knight?" Reed's voice rose. "You named it. Have you lost your mind? That thing in there has killed hundreds of people." "According to who?" James stood up, pointing at his data screens. "The Arcturians. The Centaurians. Has anyone actually verified these stories? Because everything I've seen suggests we're dealing with a highly intelligent being." "The station council is meeting in 1 hour," Reed said coldly. "They're going to order the termination. And this time, there won't be any delays." After Reed left, Tom looked nervously at James. "What are you going to do?" James grabbed his tablet and headed for the door. "I'm going to prove I'm right. Come with me." In the containment area, James did something that made Tom gasp. He lowered the security barrier between the observation room and the main cell. "Are you crazy?" Tom whispered. "That's against every safety protocol." "Just watch," James said quietly. The Shadow Stalker, Knight, moved closer to the now open doorway. Its dark form seemed to ripple in the light, but instead of attacking, it sat down and raised one of its limbs in what James now recognized as a greeting gesture. James pulled out a new device from his pocket. It was a holographic projector, something he had been working on in secret. He placed it on the floor and activated it. A series of three-dimensional shapes appeared in the air between them. Knight watched intently, then raised its limb and manipulated the shapes, completing the complex puzzle James had programmed. "Amazing," Tom whispered, his fear forgotten for a moment. James took out his tablet and wrote something. The tablet displayed the message in large letters. "They want to kill you. Why do they fear you?" Knight looked at the message for a long moment. Then, to Tom's absolute shock, it moved to the computer panel in its cell and began typing with its long fingers. The message that appeared on James's tablet was in perfect English. "Because they attacked us first. We defended ourselves. They called us monsters. Easier to kill monsters than admit mistake." Tom stumbled backward. "It can write. It knows English. It's been learning," James said, "from watching us. From the computer systems it could access in its cell. I suspected it had this level of intelligence days ago, but I needed to be sure before I showed anyone." More text appeared on the tablet. "Others of my kind still live. Hiding. Surviving. Waiting for someone who will listen." James heard footsteps in the corridor. The council members were coming early. He quickly reactivated the security barrier and hid the projector. "Dr. Walker." It was Reed's voice, accompanied by several council members. "Step away from the containment cell immediately." James stood his ground as they entered. "Council members, before you make your decision, there's something you need to see." He held up his tablet with Knight's messages. "This is absurd," one council member said. "It's clearly a trick." "Then let me prove it," James replied. "Give me one more day. Let me show you all what I've discovered. If I'm wrong, I'll activate the plasma controls myself." The council members looked at each other uncertainly. Knight stood silently in its cell, its purple eyes moving from one person to another. Finally, the head of the council spoke. "You have until this time tomorrow, Doctor. After that, we proceed with the termination. And if anything goes wrong, it's on your head." James nodded, looking back at Knight. The creature's eyes met his, and he saw something there that gave him hope. Trust. "Tomorrow, then," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we show them the truth." The demonstration room was silent except for the soft hum of computers. James stood before the gathered council members, station officers, and his nervous assistant Tom. Behind the reinforced glass, Knight waited calmly in its temporary holding area. "What I'm about to show you will change everything we thought we knew," James began. He activated the large display screen, showing videos of Knight solving increasingly complex puzzles over the past weeks. "Impressive tricks," Captain Reed said, "but this doesn't prove anything." James smiled. "Knight, would you like to tell them yourself?" The dark creature stepped forward, its shadowy form moving with graceful purpose. It touched the communication panel, and a clear voice filled the room, not mechanical, but smooth and deep. "My people were peaceful explorers," Knight said through the speaker system. Several council members jumped in surprise. "We traveled the stars long before most of your species reached space." "Impossible," one of the Arcturian representatives hissed. "They are beasts, killers." "Let it speak," James said firmly. He nodded encouragingly to Knight. 200 years ago, we made first contact with the Arcturians," Knight continued. "We approached in peace, but our appearance caused fear. They attacked without warning. When we defended ourselves, they called us monsters. Others believed their stories. Soon, everyone hunted us." Knight touched the display controls. The screen filled with images, beautiful cities that seemed built of living shadow, gardens that glowed with bioluminescent light, and children of Knight's species playing among the stars. "This was our home world," Knight said softly, "before the fear turned to hatred, before the attacks began." James watched the council members' faces. Some showed doubt, others confusion, and a few displayed the first hints of understanding. "If what you say is true," the head counselor said, "why have we never heard your side of the story?" "Would you have listened?" Knight asked. "Look at your first reaction when I arrived. Immediate calls for execution. No questions asked. Only humans." Knight turned its glowing purple eyes to James. Only humans stopped to wonder if there might be more to understand. Tom stepped forward, his earlier fear forgotten. "The intelligence tests we ran, they're off the charts. Knight's species doesn't just match our level of advancement. They might surpass it in some areas." James brought up more data on the screen. "Their technology is based on principles we're only beginning to understand. The way they manipulate light and shadow isn't just biological. It's a sophisticated form of science we've never seen before. We had to hide," Knight explained. "To survive, we became what they feared. When attacked, we fought back. When hunted, we learned to hunt. But it was never what we wanted." The creature's voice carried a deep sadness. "There are others like me, scattered across the galaxy, waiting for a chance to live in peace again." The room fell silent. Even Captain Reed seemed lost in thought. "Dr. Walker," the head counselor finally spoke, "you've taken an enormous risk. But—" She looked at Knight with new eyes. "I believe it was worth taking." "This changes nothing." The Arcturian representative stood up suddenly. "Our people will never accept." "Your people started this tragedy," James interrupted. "Humans may be new to the galactic community, but we know something about fear and prejudice. We've made similar mistakes in our own history. We also learned from them." Knight moved closer to the glass, its form rippling with complex patterns that James had learned to recognize as emotion. "We don't seek revenge. We want what we always wanted: peaceful coexistence, a chance to share knowledge, to rebuild." The head counselor stood. I move to officially recognize Knight species as sentient beings with full diplomatic rights. All in favor. Hands rose slowly around the room. Not all, but enough. Captain Reed, after a long moment, raised his hand too. There will be resistance, the counselor warned. Many will not want to believe. James looked at Knight, seeing not a shadow of death, but a reflection of humanity's better nature. The ability to move past fear and reach for understanding. Then we'll make them believe, he said. One person at a time, if we have to. It's time for the shadows to step into the light. Knight's purple eyes glowed with what James now knew was hope. Together, the creature said, we begin again. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. James was in his lab, discussing star maps with Knight, when the station's alert system blared to life. Warning, 3 vessels approaching. Weapons systems detected. Captain Reed's voice came through the speakers. Dr. Walker, get to the command center. Now. When James arrived, the main screen showed 3 warships, 2 Arcturian battle cruisers, and 1 Centaurian destroyer. Their weapons were charged and aimed at the station. They're demanding we hand over the Shadow Stalker, Reed said, his face grim. They're calling it a threat to galactic security. The head counselor stood by the communications panel, her hands shaking slightly. They're threatening to declare war on humanity if we don't comply. They say we're harboring a dangerous criminal species. James felt his heart race. Did you tell them what we learned? About the truth. They don't want to hear the truth, Tom said from his station at the sensors. The Arcturian commander cut off transmission as soon as we tried to explain. The station shook as the first warning shot passed close by. Red lights flashed across every screen. We have 10 minutes to comply, Reed announced. After that, they say they'll take action. James straightened his back. Let me talk to Knight. In the lab, Knight was already standing at the observation window. Its dark form seemed more solid, more present than ever before. You should let them take me, Knight said as soon as James entered. Your people shouldn't die for my kind's sake. James stepped closer to the window. That's not going to happen. But I need to know. You said there were others of your kind out there. Can you contact them? Knight's purple eyes glowed brighter. Yes, but calling them would confirm every fear our enemies have. They would see it as an attack. Maybe that's what we need, James said. Not an attack, but a show of strength. Proof that your people aren't hiding because they're guilty, but because they chose peace over conflict. The station rocked with another near miss. Captain Reed's voice came over the speaker. 5 minutes, Dr. Walker. Knight moved to the computer terminal. Its fingers flew over the keys. There are 3 ships of my people within range. But James, it turned its glowing eyes to him. If I call them, everything will change. There will be no going back. Things already changed the moment you showed us the truth, James replied. Make the call. The next 3 minutes were the longest of James's life. The station's shields deflected 2 more warning shots. The enemy ships moved into attack position. Then Tom's excited voice came through the speakers. Multiple ships dropping out of light speed. But these readings can't be right. James ran back to the command center. On the main screen, 3 massive ships had appeared. They seemed to be made of living shadow, their surfaces rippling like night skin. They were easily twice the size of the Arcturian cruisers. By the stars, Reed whispered. The new ships took up defensive positions around the station. No weapons were charged, but their mere presence made the attackers pause. A transmission came through, and a voice like Knight's filled the command center. This is the Twilight Vanguard. We speak for the Shadow Stalker people. We come in peace, but we will defend our kind and those who protect them. The Arcturian ships began to back away slowly. Wait, James called out. Before you go, show them. At his words, Knight's people activated their ship's external lights. The command center gasped as beautiful patterns of light and shadow danced across space. forming images of cities, gardens, and peaceful scenes just as night had shown them before. "We were never your enemy," the Twilight Vanguard transmitted to all ships. "This is who we are, who we have always been. Look upon our true nature and understand at last." The Arcturian commander's voice came through, sounding shaken. How long have you had these ships near our worlds?" "Always," came the reply. "Watching, waiting, hoping that someday someone would see past their fear. Thanks to humanity, that day has come." James looked at the amazing display of light and shadow playing across space, then at Captain Reed and the council members. Their faces showed awe, not fear. "Sometimes," James said quietly, "the monsters we fear most are just reflections of our own prejudice." The head counselor nodded slowly. "Send a message to Earth," she said. Tell them that humanity has made first contact with a remarkable people. And this time, we got it right." James sat in the station's main archive room, surrounded by holographic displays. After the dramatic standoff a week ago, the station had become the center of a diplomatic storm. Night stood beside him, its shadowy form helping him sort through thousands of historical records. "Look at this one," James said, pulling up an old report. 40 years ago, First Contact Protocol 847. In case of encounter with shadow-based life forms, immediate termination authorized without standard diplomatic approach. Tom entered the room carrying more data crystals. "I found something worse in the Centaurian archives," he said. "They actually edited their historical records. The original peaceful contact with Knight's people was completely erased." Knight touched one of the screens, bringing up an ancient star map. "This was our first colony world," it said quietly. "When the Arcturians attacked, 5,000 of my people lived there. None survived." James felt a chill run down his spine. "They weren't just hunting you," he said. "This was systematic extinction." The door slid open, and Captain Reed walked in. His face looked older, tired. "Earth Command just sent this," he said, handling James a datapad. "It's classified files from the first days of human space exploration. We were warned about your species, Knight. Told you were too dangerous to even attempt communication." "How many?" Knight asked. "How many of my people died because of these lies?" James scrolled through more records, his hands shaking slightly. "At least 12 major colonies, thousands at each one." He looked up at Knight. "Why didn't your people fight back with full force? Those ships we saw, you could have defended yourselves." Knight's purple eyes dimmed. "Because we knew that violence would only prove their fears correct. We chose to hide, to survive, to wait for someone who would listen. We had almost lost hope." Tom, who had been quiet, suddenly called out from his terminal. "Dr. Walker, I found something. Look at this encryption pattern in the Arcturian military files." James rushed over. The screen showed communication logs from 2 centuries ago. "This is from their first contact with Knight's people," he said, his voice growing excited. "Tom, can you break it?" "Already did," Tom said proudly. Oh no." The decoded message appeared on screen. "Shadow creatures discovered in Sector 7. Initial scans show advanced technology far beyond our capabilities. Recommendation: immediate preemptive action to prevent potential dominance of their species. Mark all records as defensive response to aggression." The room fell silent. Knight moved closer to the screen, its form rippling with emotion. "They attacked us because we were too advanced. Fear," James said softly. "Fear of being surpassed, of becoming secondary to a more advanced species. So they struck first and rewrote history to justify it." Captain Reed sat down heavily in a chair. "All these years, all these deaths, based on a lie." James began copying the files to a secure database. "We need to release this to every species in the galaxy. Show them the truth." "It won't be that simple," Reed warned. "The Arcturians and others will try to stop us. They've built their reputation on being victims of the deadly shadow stalkers. This truth will destroy that narrative. Good, James said firmly. It needs to be destroyed. Night moved to the center of the room, its form creating patterns of light and shadow on the walls. My people have carried this burden for too long. We watched our children hide in darkness, our culture fade to whispers, our true nature twisted into nightmare stories to frighten young ones. James placed his hand on the cool surface where Night's shoulder would be. Not anymore. Humanity stands with you now. Tom looked up from his terminal again. The first news broadcasts are going out now. I'm seeing responses already coming in from colonies and stations across the galaxy. They're angry. Not at Night's people, at the deception. The truth has a way of creating its own light, James said, even in the darkest shadows. Night's purple eyes glowed brighter. Perhaps that is why your people were meant to find us. You understand darkness and light, fear and hope. You've faced your own shadows. Captain Reed stood up, his decision made. I'll contact Earth Command. We'll need their full diplomatic support for what's coming. James nodded, looking at the evidence of centuries of lies and fear spread across the screens around them. The real first contact between our people starts now, he said. This time, we'll make it right. Night's form seemed to stand taller. Then let us step into the light together and show the galaxy what truth looks like. Space Station Gamma 7's main hall had never been so full. 1 month after the truth about Night's people became public, representatives from Earth and 20 human colonies gathered to meet the first official delegation of the Shadow Stalkers, now known by their true name, the Luminary. James stood near the front of the hall, watching as 3 Luminary ships docked with the station. Night stood beside him, its shadowy form rippling with excitement. Hard to believe this is the same station that wanted to execute you 2 months ago, Tom whispered from behind them. The doors opened, and the Luminary delegation entered. Unlike Night, who had learned to dim its natural bioluminescence during its time in hiding, these Luminary glowed with patterns of soft purple and blue light that danced across their dark forms. The effect was beautiful rather than frightening. Welcome to Gamma 7, the head counselor said, stepping forward. We are honored to host this historic meeting. The leader of the Luminary delegation, who called herself Dawn, moved to the center of the hall. Her voice was musical when she spoke. For 200 years, we waited in darkness. Today, we step into the light again, thanks to the courage of one human who chose to look past fear. James felt all eyes turned to him, but Night spoke first. James Walker showed us that not all species would reject us. His trust gave us hope again. Captain Reed, now wearing his formal uniform, stepped forward with a datapad. The Earth Coalition has reviewed all evidence of the historical persecution of the Luminary people. We formally acknowledge the injustice done to your species and offer our full diplomatic support. Dawn's form brightened. We accept humanity's friendship, and we offer something in return. She raised her hand, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the hall. This is our gift to Earth and its colonies. The display showed technical specifications that made the scientists in the room gasp. James looked at the scrolling data with wide eyes. These are your shadow drive specifications, he said in awe. You're faster than light technology. The very technology that made others fear us, Dawn confirmed. We offer it freely to humanity, along with other advancements we've developed in hiding. Your people have earned our trust. The Arcturian ambassador, who had been watching from the back of the hall, stepped forward. You would give humans such power after what was done to your people. Night moved closer to James. Humans have shown us what we long hoped to find, the ability to overcome fear with understanding. They will use this knowledge wisely. Tom, who had been studying the technical data, looked up suddenly. These shadow drive specifications, they could be modified for medical technology. The way they manipulate energy, we could revolutionize healing techniques. Dawn's patterns glowed brighter. Yes, Our technology was never meant for war. We were healers, builders, explorers. Now we can be again." The head counselor raised her hands for attention. "Today, we form more than an alliance. We begin a collaboration that will benefit all species who choose to join us." As if on cue, more luminary ships appeared near the station, dropping out of shadow space. But instead of causing panic, their arrival brought excitement. Each ship carried different designs, different patterns of light, a display of their culture's true beauty. "Look," James said softly to Knight. "No one's afraid anymore." Knight's purple eyes seemed to smile. "Fear cannot survive in the light of understanding. Your people taught us that." Dawn moved to the center of the hall again. "Let this station be the first of many shared spaces between our peoples. We will build together, learn together, grow together." The Earth representatives stepped forward to formally sign the alliance agreement. As they did, the luminary ships outside began a magnificent display of light and shadow, painting the stars with their art for the first time in centuries. Captain Reed stood next to James, watching the display. "You know," he said quietly, "when you first refused to execute Knight, I thought you were going to get us all killed." James smiled. "Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards." "Indeed," Knight added, "and sometimes the darkest shadows can help us find the brightest light." Outside the station windows, humans and luminary began to mingle, sharing stories and knowledge. The age of fear was ending. The age of understanding had begun. 1 year had passed since the historic alliance between humans and the luminary. James stood at the observation deck of the new Unity station, a massive structure built with combined human and luminary technology. The station floated at the edge of Earth's solar system, its crystalline towers glowing with shadow light technology. "Still admiring the view?" Knight asked, appearing beside him. Like many luminary now, it no longer hid its natural bioluminescence. Beautiful patterns of light danced across its dark form. "Hard not to," James replied, "especially knowing what we've achieved in just 1 year." Below them, in the station's medical wing, human doctors worked alongside luminary healers. The combination of human medical knowledge and luminary shadow energy technology had already cured 3 diseases thought to be untreatable. Tom's voice came over the station's comm system. "Dr. Walker, you're needed in the education center. The first class of human luminary students is about to graduate." James smiled. After the alliance, Tom had become the head of the Joint Species Education Program. Young humans now learned alongside luminary children, each species teaching the other their unique ways of seeing the universe. In the education center's main hall, James found Captain Reed, now Admiral Reed, already waiting. The Admiral had become one of the strongest supporters of the Alliance after seeing its benefits. "Quite a change from our first meeting with Knight, isn't it?" Reed said, watching as human and luminary students filed into the hall together. Dawn, the luminary leader, stepped onto the stage. Her form cast beautiful patterns of light across the walls. "When we first revealed ourselves to humanity," she began, "we hoped for acceptance. Instead, we found something more valuable: understanding. These students represent our shared future." The graduating class stood together, humans in their formal uniforms, luminary glowing with pride. They had spent 3 months learning each other's sciences, cultures, and dreams. A young human student stepped forward with her luminary project partner. Together, they activated a holographic display showing their joint thesis, a new form of space travel combining human rocket technology with luminary shadow drives. "The shadows are not something to fear," the human student said. "They're just another form of light we hadn't learned to see yet." James felt Knight's form ripple with emotion beside him. "Remember when everyone on the station wanted to execute me?" it asked quietly. "Hard to forget," James replied. "Now look, there are luminary on every major human station, and human scientists working in luminary cities." The Arcturian ambassador, one of the few who had chosen to embrace change, approached them. The Centaurian Council has finally agreed to formally apologize for their role in the historical persecution, she said. They're requesting luminary teachers for their own education centers. Forgiveness takes courage, Knight said, but change takes even more. After the graduation ceremony, James walked with Knight through the station's garden level. Here, earth plants grew alongside luminary crystal flowers, creating an otherworldly beauty. Human children played among the glowing plants, no longer afraid of the shadows. We received another signal today, Knight said. More of my people coming out of hiding. They've been watching humanity's acceptance of us. They want to come home. James looked out at the stars. How many more are out there? Many, Knight replied. But now they have hope. Every human who smiles at a luminary child, every joint project, every new discovery we make together, it shows them that peace is possible. Tom's voice came over the comm again. Dr. Walker, the new Shadow Drive medical ships are ready for their first mission. They're waiting for your inspection. James looked at Knight, ready to save more lives. Knight's purple eyes glowed brightly. Together, it said, the way it should be. As they walked toward the medical bay, they passed a wall covered in photographs. The history of their alliance. There was James standing up to the station council. Knight revealing its true intelligence. The first luminary ships emerging from hiding. Human and luminary children learning together. You know, James said, stopping at the last photo, they still tell stories about the deadly shadow stalkers in some parts of the galaxy. Knight's form rippled with what James now recognized as laughter. Let them tell new stories now. Stories of how humanity saw light in the darkness. How understanding defeated fear. How friendship changed the galaxy. James nodded, watching more ships dock with Unity Station. Human vessels next to luminary shadow ships, working together as if it had always been this way. The best stories, he said, are the ones that teach us to look past our fears and find something wonderful waiting in the shadows.